This conference will now be recorded.
And I know through some of the registrations, people ask the question, are the sessions recorded? The answer is yes. Where do you go to find that recording? That would be on our website. If you join us on archercareer.com, and then there's a menu option called Insights. And then we have a couple of different areas where we put our webinars, various materials that we share. We hope you find these beneficial. Please come back and continue to reference some of these as you see fit. Over this summer, we've been doing a tremendous amount of these conversations, webinars. I've really enjoyed them. I think the information is valuable. If you're joining us for the first time tonight, welcome. It's very nice to have you, and I hope you'll find this conversation interesting. For those of you that are thinking about consulting, there's several consulting webinars that we've done already. Feel free to take the opportunity to reference those. They're kind of in reverse chronological order. So go back and listen to a few of them. And I think that if you're starting this process, especially, that will be beneficial to giving you some context if you're going down a path of preparing either for consulting or case interviews. So our topic tonight is what I call case interviews beyond consulting. And the reason for that is that case interviews are not exclusive to consulting interviews. They're used much more widely. I'm going to talk about that more as we go along tonight. And to jump into our conversation, get things started, let me just, for those of you that have not joined us in the past, let me share a little bit about me and my background. So my name is Pam Schilling. I lead our team at Archer Career. I founded this company about 10 years ago. And one of the reasons that I decided to create Archer Career was that I was a consultant. I was a part of the hiring team. I was part of the campus recruiting, and I would many times do first round interviews. And I would see individuals that I knew had the talent to be a consultant, but weren't as prepared as you need to be. When I left consulting, and I worked for 3 different consulting firms, large and boutiques, in between that, I had an opportunity to work in a corporate position for a later stage startup that IPO'd while I was there. I led one of our finance teams, and in that role, I hired several people. I created a new organization from scratch. I had to bring some new individuals into the team. And one of the things I did was I used case interviews. Was I just following the process that I knew from having been a consultant? Maybe, but there might have been some other reasons that I chose to use that approach in my interview process. And then I'll share a little bit more of that. And on top of it, we hire people for our company today, the organization. Even though we're small, we have a very rigorous hiring process. We use case interviews. Our attention tonight is going to be on the topic of the case interview beyond consulting. It's not just for consulting anymore. As I talk about this, if those of you have a lens on the consulting interview process, I will share some other things that, in addition to this, you can reference. We've had a couple of past webinars on that. We'll be continuing to have some more webinars in the coming fall. But this is a great foundational conversation. And I want to introduce this topic by way of a short activity for all of you. So if you're game, if you all have your notebook in front of you, I'm going to ask you a question. That question is, if you're given a project to plan a special company 100-year celebration event for the summer of 2021, what would you do to begin this project? Why don't you guys think about that for a second and maybe write down in your notebook 3 things that you might do as starting steps to begin planning that event. Obviously, if it's a 100-year celebration, this is a big deal for a company. It's a big deal for anyone who might turn 100. And when you have written down a couple of things in your notebook, then come back to the chat, and I'd love to have you all put one idea in the chat. What would you do to start a project like this? And just type in one thing that you think might be one of your beginning steps. Excellent. So someone has said, I need the budget. That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of hard to plan an event. It was a little bit like planning my wedding. If I didn't have a budget, it could have gone haywire. Another idea, how many people will be attending? That is also a fantastic question, because the way that we might do that event would be contingent upon how many people are coming. Is it small? Is it big? You know, I know when I was planning my wedding, we were anticipating 100 guests. We wanted to have a really small wedding, so that affected where we would have it. The venue, someone else mentioned that. Stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? That's another great thing to understand. Who and why are we doing this? Who has to be involved in the decision making? You would be super surprised at doing things like this. People want to weigh in. What's the kind of communication? How are we going to let people know this? Excellent. Okay. This is fantastic. So you all are seeing what we're doing right here is the start of a case interview. And this question could be for any organization, anytime, any place. So in my work, I have a chance to work with lots and lots of different individuals. They are focusing on many different types of organizations. Some of these, and I just have one of those pages up in front of you that has a lot of icons. Some of these are consulting firms who obviously use case interviews. Others of them, though, are consulting firms, not quite, well, maybe internal consulting in a company, but they're also general company roles. And this is one of the things that sometimes as professionals preparing for interviews, we don't quite think about the case outside of a consulting firm. Therefore, it's important to be prepared, because the last thing you want is to get in an interview and be slightly surprised. So this is where we're going to pay attention to some of these things tonight. So the idea is, when you get that question about the 100-year celebration, what key things would you do to begin it? You aren't sitting there asking yourself, what do I do? You have some preparation so that you understand what to do next and what the interviewer is expecting. And what I don't want to have happen is that you're preparing for interviews and this catches you by surprise. The best thing is to anticipate that something is going to happen. And then, by the way, if it doesn't, it's okay. It's better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. And yes, that question could be given to you in any interview, anywhere, anytime. This means it's important to understand who is using case interviews, what's the likelihood of it, and are you someone who's in an interview process that might face a case? Well, it is good to understand the scope of this and just to identify a few things. Many corporate roles use case interviews. It could be a leadership program, could be something in product management, could be a market research position, could be a data science position, and then we go into the financial services sector. Could be a financial analyst inside of a company, could be for an investment bank, could be the private equity firms, venture capital, anything within finance. And then as an example, teachers. So I've sat in academic positions myself. I've been on the faculty. I've done faculty hiring. We give people mini cases. You know, you have a class, you have a student experiencing this. How would you handle it? Elementary teachers, high school teachers, you know, just as an example, because sometimes I think teaching is about as far afield from business as you can get, although it depends, not always. Teaching is actually a really interesting business in and of itself. And the main point of what I want you to understand with this is who uses case interviews? Anybody. Anybody can, and many people will. What drives it is the thinking of the interviewer, what their background is, what they're used to doing, how they want to test candidates, what is the culture of the organization, what do they expect, how do they want to evaluate candidates. That is important for you to think about. And it's also important to understand why a case interview is being used. So I'll come back to all of you. As we're talking about this and as you're learning about cases, and maybe from that example that I just gave you, why do you all think that a case might be used in an interview? Why do you think as a hiring manager, I might want to give you a business problem to solve right there while we're having a conversation? What ideas do you guys have? Put some of that into the chat and let me see a little bit about what you're thinking. Yep, so one response, can you solve a problem with structure? Another, structure, problem solving, some communication skills, how you handle pressure. That is a fantastic answer, because this is hard. It's a bit like an oral exam. I actually, when I did my doctoral dissertation, after 3 degrees, I had an oral exam in my doctoral program, and it was super stressful. This is a very, very important point. So some other things that you guys are speaking about, you know, are you able to focus on a topic? Are you able to kind of think about it in an ad hoc situation? What approach are you using? Absolutely. So these are all spot on. The case, if I talk about it very pragmatically, I think the case interview is often used because the individual who's interviewing you might have that experience in their background. So I hear this quite often from the various students and clients that I engage with. I had an interview at such and such company. I'll use Wayfair as an example, or Cisco, or the Walt Disney Company. And when I looked at the background of my interviewer, come to find out they're a former consultant. So you see that that person has brought over the traditions of the consulting style of interviewing to those corporate jobs. I recently worked with an undergraduate student who was interviewing with one of the boutique investment banks, and we did a case prep, and it focused on market sizing. And you might say, well, why would someone doing investment banking need to do market sizing? Well, if you're doing, say, for example, an early stage company, in order to do some of the valuation, either pre or post IPO, you want to understand the market size, and market sizing is part of a case interview. So one of the answers to this question of why is the case interview used is that people are bringing past behaviors into their current roles. The other reason is that it simulates the job, and it allows us to see how you think, and to really assess, can you do in fact what you say that you can do? So it's a show, not a tell. And for some jobs, the pressure of that job is important, or perhaps you're going to be facing executives. It's just a way to get some further evidence to see if you are someone who's going to succeed in the job. It is not always the end all be all, the only assessment. There are certainly other aspects to the interview. And many of the best companies, the best practices, they will use multiple interview approaches. When you think about it then, and if you find yourself in a position where you are interviewing, one of the aspects to understand is that when you get to the corporate environment, the style of the case interview has more variation. There's not a one way. So right now I'm working with a number of individuals. They're MBA students preparing for full-time interviews that will happen this fall. Many consulting firms will come to the business school campuses and they will do their rounds of interviews. Those interviews tend to follow some very common and consistent patterns. It's 1 or 2 interviews in the first round. They both run about 45 minutes. Then you have a second round. It might be 1, 2, or 3 interviews, and maybe they're 45 minutes to an hour. And there's some slight nuances. You know, every now and then you run into a case that's done as a team. But for the most part, there's some consistency among the consulting firms. When you get into the corporate setting, you don't have as much of that consistency. There is a spectrum of how you might experience the case interview. On that spectrum are 4 main things. There could be a few others, but I'll talk about these. The first is there could be something that I call a case scenario. It's short, it's just a discussion. That first question I gave you might be that scenario. And then maybe I would ask you some follow-up questions. So, okay, you have the budget. How would you put together a budget? How would you do some of the cost estimation? Tell me about your approach. So in a case scenario, it's a short, it's discussion. I don't expect a lot of note taking. I might not have you do any calculations. It's really just talking through your thinking. That's one aspect. The second is what I'm going to call a mini case. So this might take a little bit more time. It might be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. There's going to be more substance to it. You might have some notes in front of you. You might map out your approach. There might be a series of questions. I might give you a few numbers and then ask you to do some calculations. I might then draw in some other situations, ask you some follow-up questions, and then ask you to do some type of a conclusion. Those are mini cases, but they're not going to take a huge amount of time. So in the context of a 45-minute interview, say, we might spend 2 or 3 minutes on an introduction. I might ask you to walk through your resume. I might ask you a question, and then I would insert this mini case for about 10 minutes or so. And then I might go back to asking some of those other behavioral or experience questions. So it's a part of a larger interview. So that's the mini case. And then number 3 is what I'm going to call a normal case. And this is really the consulting style case. Anytime you are going into an interview, often with larger companies, but sometimes with smaller startup, boutique, companies, you really have to think about the people that are going to be interviewing you. And if there's a chance that you have someone who has a consulting background, there's a possibility that you might get, quote, a normal case, which is a 30 to 45-minute conversation. You would be taking notes. You'd start at the beginning. You'd work it all the way to the end. Now, how do you know if this is going to occur? The best thing in the world is just to consistently ask during your engagements as the logistics of the interview are happening. Make sure that you have that communication either with the HR person that you're engaging with or the hiring manager. And it is absolutely fair game to ask, because the organization that's interviewing you, they've spent a lot of time. Interviewing people is time consuming. My firm interviewed 14 individuals this summer for our summer internship. It took an extremely, lot of logistics and work to go through that interview process. We made it very clear that we had a case because we didn't want somebody to show up unprepared and really waste their time and ours. So therefore, you should ask those questions as well. So the fourth then type of case is a written case. And this is absolutely possible. I have had 2 clients that have had this experience in the last couple of months. And what typically happens with a written case is that prior to your interview, sometimes it's an hour before, sometimes it's a week before, you receive a prompt. And you might receive some information. It depends on the organization. And you have to put together some type of written document. My client who had this experience had to put together a PowerPoint. And that PowerPoint is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pages, just depends on the nature of the case. It has a structure to the problem for answering the question. There's some typically research expected. There might be some analysis. Maybe there's some charts that you have to build. And then from that, drawing conclusions. And then the expectation is that you come to your interview and you're either going to walk it through with your interviewers as a presentation, or they're going to receive it in advance. Say you interview it, or excuse me, you send it by email, maybe the morning of or the day before, and then they ask you questions about what you've put together. That is actually a technique that I've used on multiple occasions. So years ago, when I worked for Navtech, I interviewed financial analysts. I always gave a written case. I typically gave a case that was to value a business that was a division of a public company that was going to be carved out. How would they do the valuation? I asked them to do an Excel and a PowerPoint. And generally, I would give some guidance that this type of work, it could take 3, 4, 5 hours. So these are some of the things that are asked of all of you, depending again on the interview circumstance. Now, for a few of you that might be looking at more of the traditional consulting roles, number 3 and number 4 are both possibilities. Certainly number 3, which is the normal case, but also consulting firms have used written cases. So some of them use them in their second rounds. Some of them use a group case, which is kind of a combination of a normal and a written case, but it's also part of that process. So just to highlight that, because the areas between the non-consulting interviews and the consulting interviews overlap. This means that no matter what, it's really good to be prepared for this type of an interview. Back to some of those fun examples. So I gave you one question at the start of our conversation, but here's a couple of others. And I borrowed some of these from clients that I've worked with who got prompts for written cases or had a case interview that they had. Some of them I did some research online to find out recent questions that people are discussing in various areas. So here's an example of a case prompt that you might get. These are not consulting. So none of these are consulting examples. I explicitly excluded anything that would come from a consulting firm in my research. So this is one about a hospital. They're trying to revamp a marketing campaign. They want to grow market share in the US. To do this and inform the new campaign, they want to get a baseline understanding of a hospital's commercial value, design and execute a research study. So this is a market research position. Another example, how many cars would be in the parking lot of the ABC store on a Thursday morning between 10 a.m. and 12 noon? Think about what you need to know in the business and that location. Think about the categories of cars that would be there, make assumptions, and explain your thoughts. This is for a financial analyst position. Another example, you are working on a project that requires you to work closely with a peer from operations, typically a manager. You need to complete an update to your supervisor, but you don't have all the information. When you first approach your peer, this person seems frazzled, they have a lot on their plate, they say that they won't be able to get to it for a couple of days. How do you handle that? That was a question from an Amazon interview for an operations position. And then finally, a client owns her business, it's worth $400 million. It's looking to release some liquidity while retaining a percentage of ownership. What are your recommendations to help the client achieve that maximum valuation? That is from an investment banking interview. So I could have pages and pages of these examples. So one of the things that I want to come back and ask all of you, reading these examples, what do you think is necessary to be able to successfully answer these kinds of case questions in your interview? So beyond structure, okay, we had a lot of conversation about what you're trying to demonstrate, structure, communication, problem solving. Why don't you all share a couple of other ideas of what things you think you need to do to be prepared to successfully answer these questions if you got them in an interview? So one point is knowing some key statistics. Probably. That's actually a really interesting point. I'm going to come back to that. What else do you all think you need to know? Or how would you think about trying to be prepared for something like this? Anybody else have any ideas? Are you guys stunned by these questions? So relating some of your own experience. And I think that that's a valuable point. And I'm going to talk more about that. When you all are interviewing for these positions, something to keep in mind in the corporate setting. Okay, this is very different than in the consulting setting. But a lot of times in the corporate setting, you have a background that aligns to the role. And therefore, you have what I will describe as domain knowledge. You know something about market research. You know something about financial analysis. You know something about so with Amazon in particular, you would have researched the way that operations issues are handled. You might even know something about their leadership principles. And then for investment banking, you probably are not going to be interviewing for an investment banking role if you haven't studied something in the area of valuation or done some of that work. So part of what you want to think about for corporate roles is that often if you're getting a case, there's a little bit of an expectation that you have some background or domain knowledge that's going to help you think through that case. So, Peter, that point about your own experience, that's spot on, right? And then some of the other things that you guys are talking about is maybe speaking through scenarios of a case, having some decision trees. That's really interesting. Scenario analysis is a very valuable thing in general in any type of a case, because I'm trying to, as your interviewer, assess a little bit how you think in the moment on the spot, and how you evaluate different options, and how you include or dismiss things. What is your thought process? And then Sharvani, your point about how to prioritize, absolutely, because any one of these questions has dozens of things that you want to be thinking about. This discussion that we're going to have, it may take, again, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes, but still, these are really big, gnarly questions, and you're not going to solve them exhaustively, even in 30 minutes. So your ability to prioritize is very, very important. So thank you all for those comments. This means that you want to think about the end game. What are you trying to demonstrate to the interviewer? Well, some of this we've already talked about. Some of it has to do with being structured. Some of it has to do with showing domain knowledge. Some of it has to do with being able to think on the spot. Some of it is your ability to look your interviewer in the eye and with confidence ask questions. When there's something that you don't know, how do you handle it? When the interviewer asks you a question, how do you handle that? Maybe they push back on one of your ideas. These are all things that are important, but let me summarize kind of macro level things that you want to be showing. So one is, how will you work if you get the job? I am seeing in the moment, I'm seeing a live action experience. I'm not seeing a choreographed video of what you might do with an actor. I'm seeing you real time in the moment. And what does that mean? If I give you a little bit of a case scenario, do you take notes? Do you put them down in your notebook? Do you pause? Do you ask questions? Do you acknowledge when you see trade-offs and that you see pros and cons with each of those trade-offs? Do you ask me questions? This is all how we will work together. And part of that has to do with building a relationship, because the person who's giving you that case potentially is the person who's going to hire you. The second thing, and this has been mentioned, but I'll just repeat it, I want to know how you think on your feet. I don't expect you to be completely surprised if I give you a case, because any smart interviewer hopes that you've done your research. Any smart candidate has done their research. Therefore, this isn't about surprising you that you're getting a case question. What you have to do to think on your feet is to think about this specific question that I've asked you. And what do you do in the moment when you have to kind of run through the various ideas and ask questions and all of those things? The third thing, and again, I mentioned this just previously, but I'll emphasize it again. How do you handle your domain or your knowledge area? If you say that you are a supply chain expert, and I ask you a case about supply chain, and you can't relay that to me, I'm not going to hire you. If I ask you a question about leadership and you want to go into a rotational program that's a leadership development program, and you can't express to me how you might give constructive feedback to a person on your team, I'm not going to hire you. So that display of your domain knowledge is critical. Some of you have experience that your domain knowledge sits on. Some of you, this domain knowledge may be more book knowledge. You may be a student, you may be learning your subject either at an undergraduate or a graduate level. You might be, in that case, speaking a little more theoretically. But still, you could say, look, I remember taking a class, we talked about marketing, we talked about market research, and I remember that a couple of the important areas to focus on were A, B, and C. And so if I was approaching this problem, I'd want to do that. That's exactly the right thing. And to show what you know, and then to show the things and to say, there's some areas that I don't think I fully know. I'd want to go do some research on A, B, and C. That's how you handle the domain knowledge. The more senior the role, the more domain knowledge you have to have. Another way to think about it, the higher the salary, the job, the more domain knowledge you have to have. And by the way, I think that's a point that I should emphasize right here. This could be for any level. I had a client of mine who was interviewing for a very senior job in a Fortune 100 industrials company. And with 20 years of business experience, this person got a case. So it's not just for junior jobs, it's also for senior jobs. The fourth thing that you're trying to demonstrate, and someone mentioned this as well in the chat, is how you communicate. Are you looking the person in the eyes? These days, if you're doing the interviews virtually, that means looking into the camera. I don't have my video on just for our purposes, but if I did, I'd be doing my best to keep my eyes on the green dot on my camera. Do you pause? Do you emphasize things? Are you clear? Do you summarize? One of the areas of communication that can be very valuable is how you present data and information, because walking through that can be challenging. But communication skills are important, and especially when you're communicating a case. If you're going to give recommendations at the end, you have to be a tiny bit persuasive. And then the last thing that you're trying to demonstrate with these cases is confidence. And this gets back to handling the pressure, thinking on your feet. How are you thinking about whatever the issue has been presented to you? You have a limited amount of time, but do you, in that limited amount of time, make the best of it and say, this is the direction that I would head, without hedging that thinking and saying, well, I don't have enough data and I don't have all the facts. It's like, I know that. I've set up this little simulation to put you in that circumstance. So don't hedge it. You can say, knowing what I know or having had some experience with this, this is the way I would think. When I present that point, many times people will say to me, well, hey, Pam, you know what? What if I'm wrong? What if the idea that I present, the manager doesn't like it? It's too risky, it's too bold, it blah, 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 whatever it is, the manager doesn't like it. And what I try to provide perspective on and would say to all of you is that part of this confidence is you have to be you, and you have to put your ideas out there. And if the hiring manager doesn't like those ideas or they don't resonate, it is much better for you to know that at the interview stage than to squeak your way through. And then every minute that you're in that job, you and that manager have conflict. So I tend to adopt a philosophy of be confident in the way that you think. And if that thinking maybe doesn't align well with the organization, that is in your best interest. I mean, that may sound a bit challenging in an environment like we're all in right now, where it seems that jobs are few and far between. But if you get into that job and it's not a good fit, there's a chance that you could lose that job. So it's better to figure out that fit. And then I'll say the other thing about that confidence to be bold. Many times the reason that I'm giving you a case is I want to see the extent of your thinking. I want to see the boldness in your thinking because I need to hire people that are going to help me solve problems. And sometimes problems need bold ideas. Okay. All right. And I know there's a question in the chat. I'll come back to that at the end. The synthesis of some of this then is, given this light conversation, this introduction, what do you do to prepare? And there are many things, don't get me wrong. There's programs of study, I have them, I do long case workshops. I have 12 hours of case workshops that often I run. So I'm certainly not going to give you all an exhaustive list. But sometimes there are some small things that you can do that make big impacts. If you are perhaps near term interviewing, you don't have a lot of time to prepare. There's some simple things to do. So go into Google and do a search on finance case studies or marketing case studies or good case study questions, good case interview questions, whatever your favorite topic is. And read those prompts, just like I did. It took me all of 4 minutes to find those examples that I gave you guys. And read the prompt and then ask yourself a few questions. You know, how would I think about this? What information would I want? How might I structure it? What kind of analysis would I do? What different scenarios could I think about for this question? I mean, each question may be a little bit different. And run yourself through those thought exercises. The second thing is, it doesn't hurt to actually take a case prompt and practice working through it out loud. You could even do this with a partner. You can, in addition, practice it in writing. And that way, if you get the written case, you'll have a structure. Another really good way to do those first two things is to read an article in the Wall Street Journal. There are many of them that are talking about a business in some kind of difficulty or facing some challenge. I was reading an article about Brooks Brothers. Brooks Brothers has filed for bankruptcy. All I need to do is, if I was interviewing for a retail position and I got a question, you know, if you were helping Brooks Brothers, let's say that you're the chief marketing officer, what ideas would you have? If you guys don't know Brooks Brothers, they make kind of neat, higher end clothing, men's and women's, kind of tailored, stylish. And they were bought by a private equity firm a few years back, and that's really hurt their financial position. And then they, you know, face a lot of challenges like retailers do. So, you know, you could kind of talk through some of the scenarios. Then what analysis would I do? What information would I want to gather? All of those various things. You know, Amazon is having a lot of challenges right now with their one-day delivery. Well, if you were at the leadership helm of the company, how might you attack that, right? So you can do some of this practice, and then if you have colleagues, friends, family, other people that like doing these types of things, do it with them and just talk about it out loud. I mean, the nice thing about the corporate setting is that the interview isn't so structured. Now, again, if you have former consultants interviewing you, then you may have to take your interview preparation up several levels. But again, you should know that going into the process. The third thing on here is to brush up on your domain and its theory. So this is where there's a question here about managerial accounting. So I have an accounting background. I have a degree, an undergraduate degree in accounting. I have done many case interviews as a candidate. I've done them at least 4 times in different roles that I've interviewed for. And generally, I will go and I will brush up on financial accounting ratios. And then there are some key concepts from managerial accounting, which is different from financial accounting. So looking at break even, looking at price volume analysis, looking at pricing analysis, those things are valuable because you might get questions related to any position that involves financial information or operational information. And you should know your domain. That's one of the things that you really have to do to study the position to make sure that you have some of that backdrop. You know, I mean, I could probably do approaches for inventory depreciation or other types of depreciation, but it might be worth my time to spend 10 minutes thinking about that if I happen to go into a position, say, for example, that's banking, investment banking. And depreciation is a big deal when you're doing financial models and valuation and other things. So whoever you are, looking at your background, looking at the kind of role that you're interviewing for, and then going to that theory, could be a textbook, could be something online, it will benefit you. You don't have to restudy everything, but it doesn't hurt to brush up. And then the fourth thing that I think is valuable for corporate interviews, I do think this is helpful for those of you that might also be looking at consulting, but I think it's especially relevant for corporate interviews. Researching the company and their particular issues. If you're going in to do an interview, and let's just say it's with a healthcare provider, so kind of a hospital system, what would be the 3 or 4 big issues that in an operations role or in a finance role you might have to pay attention to? Well, if it's a public company especially, but even through networking or other materials they have on their website, you might learn about a few things that the company is caring about. You know, so these days, hospitals, what do they care about? They care about revenue. So they care about the insurance practices that enable them to capture the most revenue possible. They care about patient experience, because the better the patient experience scores, the more patients they get, and this helps their revenue. They care about readmission of patients. The less you do that, the lower your cost structure. And then if you get into some unique issues, as an example, because of the COVID environment we're working on, things that are virtual are very helpful to hospitals. So things like telemedicine and doing video calls and text follow-up and those sorts of things. So how cool is it if you are having an interview and you've done some research on the organization and the kind of issues that they're facing, and you just have thought about that. And then you get a scenario that asks you about one of those issues. Now, that may seem like whether it's coincidence or dumb luck, but the thing is, that's not luck. That's just you taking some ownership and some proactive steps to try to be as prepared as possible. And it also has a secondary benefit, which is you've done research about the organization. And so when you get questions such as, why do you want to work for us? Or, what questions do you have for me? You can ask about how some of those issues are maybe being handled, right? It creates a much stronger position overall for you as a candidate. Now, if you want to know much more deeply about case interviews, there is a tremendous amount of information. How to begin a case, how to structure the problem, how to ask questions, how to do the analysis, how to read charts, how to brainstorm, how to conclude. There's a tremendous amount of information that's out there if you find yourself in a position where you're going to do more of the traditional consulting like interview. If you are a student, many times on your campus, you may have a career office or a consulting club. Sometimes they have outside people like me that come in and train on that stuff. They may have access to resources where you can do some of that stuff online. They may have books. You can buy books on Amazon. You can watch lots of free videos that are on consulting firm web pages and YouTube, and you can build that knowledge base, okay? And if you guys stay tuned and you have some interest in this, and maybe your campus or maybe you're an alum, if you don't have some of that programming, we're probably going to do some of that by webinar in the early part of the fall. So, mostly I'm saying that because there's definitely more steps to this. I don't want to underrepresent how rigorous the process is for the normal case, whether it's corporate or consulting. These are some of the preliminary and the kinds of things if you're doing more of that scenario or mini case. All right, so I have a couple of just closing comments, and then I want to open it up to questions. So a couple things while you guys are thinking about any questions that you might have. So again, I mentioned that on our website, we have tremendous, number of these webinars we've done. They're accessible to you. Please take advantage of those. Our webinars will continue in September. We're taking a little bit of a end of summer holiday from our webinar series, mostly to, relax and get our kids off to school, but we'll be back. And so please watch for those. The other thing that I want to just share with all of you as an opportunity, so my team has been putting together a case prep software application. And if you all go out to our webpage and put your name in, if you're interested, when we launch in a couple of weeks, we're offering everyone who's joining our webinars a 1-month trial subscription to it. So it's something we're really excited about. It directly addresses the consulting case interview, but also a lot of good things for the corporate interview. And I've just shared that in the chat if you guys are at all interested in that. And then another thing that we're doing are some coaching sessions that if you feel like you want to chat through something more individually, we have this program that we're donating the coaching fee to a local nonprofit, a very, very minimal fee, but 100% of it goes to that nonprofit. We're doing this throughout the summer just to give back and support our community. So just a few other things that I want to share with you. Back to our questions. Talked about a lot of things. What aspects of the case can we speak to? And you guys are welcome to ask about the corporate interview or the consulting interview. I'm open to both. And feel free to take yourself off mute if you want to ask the question live. It must be perfectly clear, which I hope is the case. Any questions? All right, while we're doing that, I had a couple of questions that came with the registration, so let me address a couple of those. One of the questions I received in advance was that I'm starting the MBA this fall and I have a summer interview with one of the firms before school ever begins. So whoever submitted that question, congratulations, that's fantastic. But I understand your challenge. So the question further says, I've not had any prior experience in consulting. What's expected? How can someone like me compete with an experienced consultant? Excellent, excellent question. A few things. One is, I do think you have to expect that they're looking for you to have done a little bit of preparation. Anytime you're a student, and even, especially an MBA student, even if you haven't had classes, it's valuable to get some practice on the cases. Therefore, I would do a few things very quickly. I would take a little bit of time, go through some of the videos on the consulting firm websites and YouTube, as I mentioned. Then, if you're going to an MBA program, if it is a large MBA program, say one of the top 10, 15, 20, reach out to some of your second year classmates. Find out, maybe you've got an admit chat or a Reddit group or a Facebook group or a WeChat group, whatever it might be. Reach out to a couple people and say, I have an interview. I need a couple people to practice with. You can also reach out to your consulting club and find a person or two. That's fantastic. There are also plenty of resources. So there are plenty of firms that do what I do. I call us the case prep pros. Sometimes you have to pay a fee to hire a pro. There are pros and cons of hiring a pro. The pro is of the pro. You get a great prep experience. The con is it might cost you a little bit. But there's some very good, inexpensive resources, things like eVisors and Prep Lounge and others, that sometimes for less than $100 a case, you can get some preparation. People like me and my team, we tend to have a little bit of a higher price point because of our degrees of experience and how we work with you and some of the higher levels of service. So there's a range, but that could be worth your while once you've exhausted all of those free resources. And the other thing that sometimes you can do is find some alumni or current consultants at that firm who will help you prepare. One of the things I'll say before I answer the second part of the question is this: consulting firms want you to be successful, and they want to invest in you as a candidate and hope that you will be successful, because it's tiring to do the interview process. It's interesting that you mentioned EY. I actually have a couple friends of mine that are recruiters for EY. One of them does experienced hire recruiting, and she'll often share with me it's just disappointing that they've recruited a candidate for, say, 4 or 5 months. They come in, they do their case interview, and it's no good, and they get kicked out. And that's just a bummer for everybody. And so, I tell you all that because sometimes we feel like maybe the interviewer's looking for an excuse to kick us off. They're really not. They actually want you to succeed. The second part of your question, what is expected of you It's all these things that we've been talking about, to ask good questions, to structure the problem, attack it, do some analysis. You have to make conclusions without a ton of information. You might have to have a position on a particular subject. And how do you compete with someone with experience? So I would say it this way, experience doesn't always make you a better case interviewer. And what I have seen in my experience, so I would show up to the schools where I recruited. I live in Chicago, so typically it was Chicago Booth and Kellogg, and I would interview really fantastic people. And some of those people had prior consulting backgrounds, and then they were looking to make a move to a different firm for whatever reason. It didn't necessarily give an inherent advantage, because sometimes people with that experience didn't prepare and they relied on their experience. And it might mean that they weren't as structured, they weren't as big picture and organic. They relied too much on their experience, and that's not necessarily how a case is going to be done. So, the way that I sort of summarize this is, if you think or you feel that you're competing against an experienced candidate, like, imagine that you're running a marathon and you're running against somebody who's run marathons in the past, but they haven't trained in the last year. And so they might get a cramp at the 7th mile and they can't finish the marathon. So hopefully that gives a little bit of optimism about that. Just a couple of other things about the case interview. So one of the questions that I have, this is a really nice one as well. It's about how to show that you're leading the case. And I think this is interesting in both the context of a corporate interview or a non-consulting interview and a consulting interview. And I think the thing that I would summarize, and this is a kind of a great way to wrap up some of this conversation. When you all have a scenario, a mini case, a normal case, a written case, whatever it is, treat it like it's a real situation. And what would you do? So back all the way to my first question that we started tonight with. If I gave you this project to plan this 100-year special celebration, what would you do? Well, that's a real situation. It could be a wedding, it could be a family member's 50th birthday, it could be a grandmother having a 100th birthday, it could be this company. It's a real situation. So the first thing that you all should think about is these questions are real. The second thing then is, if you and I are working together and I'm going to be your manager, I would like to think that you are someone who can think a couple steps ahead. Because when I'm hiring you, what I don't want to do is have to give you detailed instructions. So in this question, for example, if I asked you, what things would you do to begin the project? What you might do is you might say, after giving it some thought, there's 4 things I would do to begin the project. And I'd list them out and tell you. And this is why I think those are important. And then if you asked me what I would do next, I probably would do some data gathering. I'd probably get some proposals. I'd probably talk to those stakeholders. And then I probably would set up a spreadsheet to track all of this. And that would be what I would do to get started, right? So what you've done is you've actually answered the second question. You've anticipated what I might ask you next. And that is what makes any hiring manager super excited, because I know that you're thinking on your feet. I know that you're not just somebody who is going to execute tasks. And I think this is especially important the greater your salary, because again, if I'm hiring someone at upper salary levels, I expect you to be able to drive more things on your own. Okay. All right, everyone. I think this is a place that is a nice wrap up for us. I'll stay on for a few more minutes if anyone has any other questions. But my final commentary and wish for all of you is that you look at these opportunities to prepare for things like a case with enthusiasm. The roles that you're pursuing, hopefully they're the kinds of things that you really enjoy doing. Every opportunity opens new doors. You never know what a particular position is going to bring. And preparing for interviews, I know sometimes it's a grind. Sometimes it's challenging because we don't have the interview on the calendar. And so you kind of wonder what you're preparing for. But in that moment, when you get that opportunity to interview, you definitely want to shine. I know that all of you want to do that. It's not just about getting through the interview. It's like, I'd like to shine. I really like this opportunity. I want to showcase what I'm capable of so I can come in and make an impact. What I think in conclusion is that this part of the interview, it's super fun because you get to put your brain to work. You're not just reciting a bunch of stories from your past. So sometimes that adjustment of mindset helps us stay focused when the interview prep seems a little bit like I'm not sure when I'm going to get to put this stuff to work. But it's an intellectual challenge. It's fun to keep abreast of what some of the issues are that companies are facing, and that will make you ready at any point in time. All right, thank you everyone again for turning to us for some insights about job searches, interview prep, case interviews. Appreciate it. And we'll see you hopefully again at another webinar, and have a good rest of the evening. Good night.